So let's now get to your life as it intertwines with the history of Singapore, right? And the transformation of Singapore at independence from a very poor country, literally, kicked out of the Malaysian Federation, and from that point in 1965 to where Singapore is today it's transformation. I don't think even captures the fullness of that change. And I have the sense South Korea also went through a similar experience, but at a certain point, as a South Korean, I feel we've stalled. I can't pinpoint exactly where. Yes, you have the K-pop cultures, the soft power, but as a country as a whole, we seem a little bit lost in many ways, going backwards. Whereas Singapore, you're still marching forward. And I think the younger generation of Singaporeans, I think many of them are here, also have that sense that we are going forward. What explains that?
Well, I was going to say, now you're beginning to sound like Kishore Mahbubani, because you're being very brutally honest in saying we in South Korea have stalled. That's very un-Asian, by the way, to admit that you have problems and publicly is also very un-Asian. But you're right that South Korea and Singapore have had remarkably similar experiences, because South Korea and Singapore were almost equally poor. When Singapore became independent, our per capita income was $500, the same as Ghana, and I think South Korea was about the same or so.
Oh, I think we were around a lot poorer.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe.
But I mean, both South Korea and Singapore were part of the four tigers that succeeded remarkably well. But in the case of Singapore, I also want to emphasize, and this is unfortunately factually true, even though what I'm going to say is outrageous, but it's true. No society since human history began has improved the standard of living of its people as quickly and as comprehensively as Singapore has done so. It's an amazing track record. Because, Singapore has gone from, at independence, a per capita income of $500 to now having a per capita income of $88,000, higher than the United Kingdom, the British, whom I thought was so superior to me. Now I look at them and say, maybe I should send them some help. Genuinely, the British need some help. And then, by the way, it's even higher than, amazingly, even higher than the United States, which is incredibly successful.
Are you now on a par with Switzerland? Or?
I think we are in the top 5. So in the top, I think it's like Switzerland, Luxembourg, and maybe the Gulf countries, But for Singapore, the remarkable thing about Singapore is that we have no natural resources. Zero. Absolute zero. It's the only thing that the reason why this happened, and this is also a reason why I wrote this book, was because Singapore's founding fathers were probably as extraordinary as the founding fathers of the United States of America. They had 3 absolutely brilliant men, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, whom you saw up there, Dr. Goh Keng Swee, whom most people haven't heard of, and Mr. S. Rajaratnam, our foreign minister. And I had the great pleasure of getting to know all 3 of them quite well. As I explained in my memoirs, I spent a lot of time, sometimes one-on-one with these people, and you get to know people very well when you spend time one-on-one. And they were remarkable. And that explains the remarkable trajectory of Singapore as a country. And so one of the other reasons why I wrote this memoirs now is to tell younger Singaporeans, you got to appreciate the fact that you had extraordinary founding fathers. And sadly, you saw a picture of me receiving the President's Scholarship. Apparently, some of the recent scholars that Singapore sent overseas, when they came back to Singapore and they were interviewed, some of them didn't know who Dr. Goh Keng Swee was, the architect of Singapore's economic miracle. And that ignorance is what frightens me. And hopefully my book can help to sort of remedy that a bit.
But reading your book, I think, three extraordinary founding fathers, for sure. And maybe this is a reflection of their leadership, but what was impressive was how long-term thinking they had. And you talked about how you got to read the cabinet papers every Saturday, and that how you were amazed at the long-term strategic thinking that resulted in long-term strategic projects. The sewerage system, for example. So
you notice there's a lot of sewage references in my
what was that called? What was it called? Water retreatment facility or something?
Yeah,
I think that was it.
New water, yeah.
So that transformation from 500 to 88,000 is just emblematic of that long-term thinking.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think Singapore is the only country in the world, I suspect, where they're worrying about where they might be 50 years from now. Really. And certainly in terms of like mapping what climate change would do.
Yeah.
And Singapore is a very small island, right? I mean, we have nothing to fall back on. So we've got to start building up our defenses for where we will be 50 years from now. And in some of the cabinet papers I read would talk about that, about what the world will be like for 40, 50 years and how we prepare for that and how what we need to do. So, and that kind of long-term thinking is actually nowadays rarer and rarer in most countries.
Rarer and rarer.
Yeah.
And so, which is why I asked, and you don't get to read the cabinet papers anymore, but
sadly.
if you were, and what would you say is the long-term thinking now? What kinds of initiatives or projects would they be thinking, or should they be thinking?
Well, I think it's, the reason why my book is called Living the Asian Century is because I do believe that the 21st century will be the Asian century. And again, the data confirms this, by the way. What's remarkable about the United States has been clearly the most successful society since human history began. I mean, the amount of wealth that the United States has accumulated is amazing. And one of the most shocking statistics I came across was that in the year 2000, when the 21st century opened, the GNP, the economy of the United States, one country, was bigger than all the 52 countries of Asia. And the 52 countries of Asia included China, Japan, India. And guess what? United States was bigger than 52 Asian states in the year 2000. But that was an incredibly exceptional performance by the United States of America. But exceptional performances cannot last. You have to revert to the norm. And since the Asians make up 55% of the world's population, and United States makes up whatever it is, 5% of the world's population, at some point the weight of 55% is going to rise. And now already the combined GNP of Asia is at least 1.5 times bigger than United States. By 2050, it'll be 3 times bigger than United States. So, that's a natural return of the weight of Asia in the world. So in response to your question, what should Singapore think about? I think, in every century, let's say when the 19th century was a European century, London was the natural capital, right? The most thriving city. In the 20th century was the American century. New York was the natural capital of the American century. Arts, culture, economics, finances, everything. Now, if you look around the 21st century and you're looking for one city that could potentially be the capital of the Asian century, that city is Singapore. Because Singapore is the only city in Asia where all the 4 major civilizational streams of Asia flow through Singapore. Singapore is 75% Chinese population, so Chinese civilization. 15% Malay Muslim, Islamic civilization. 8% Indian, so Indian civilization. And then you have Western civilization. very powerfully embedded in Singapore because we didn't destroy the institutions that the British left behind. We built on the British rule of law and everything. So that positioned Singapore to become the natural capital of the Asian century. And so therefore Singaporeans should therefore see themselves as playing a role not just to keeping themselves prosperous and alive and doing well, but thinking of their larger regional responsibilities, how to help this region deal with the new environment. Because as new powers emerge, there'll be all kinds of challenges emerging also.
Yes.
And that's one thing that the founding fathers of Singapore were very good at. And I'll give you a simple example. When Singapore was expelled from Malaysia in 1965, I described how there was complete doom and gloom in Singapore. Everyone wept and said, Singapore has no future. Singapore is a city without a hinterland. And we were rejected by the hinterland, Malaysia. But guess what? You know what Rajaratnam did? Rajaratnam, one of the three brilliant founding fathers, he leapfrogged over our region and he said Singapore will be the first global city in Asia.
That was
in 1972.
72.
Can you imagine that? How far back? And his dream came true. They became a global city. So that's the kind of long-term thinking. And by the way, Singapore in 1972 was an incredibly poor third world developing country, where not all the houses had flush toilets and all that yet completely, So, it's amazing how far we have come. So even when we were that poor, we were thinking, we will become a global city. That's the kind of long-term vision you need. And that's what I think you need to have in Singapore today.
So this is the long-term thinking going on among the leadership now. Singapore
I cannot speak for the leadership.
Singapore becoming the center of the Asian century.
Yeah. Right? That's what I would advocate. You asked me what I would advocate.
No, I think already it's happening because so many players are wanting to be in Singapore. Maybe Asia society should also
偷偷告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹润。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。